Southeastern Russia, the Strait of Kerch, connecting the Azov and the Black Seas. On November 11th, 2007, near the Russian port of Kavkaz, there were 59 vessels all crowded into the strait, a third of them oil tankers. That day, the Strait of Kerch was hit, and hit hard, with a 6 to 7 magnitude storm. The tanker Volganeft-139 was the first to go. A 15-foot-high wave literally broke the tanker in half. More than 1,000 tons of crude oil poured out into the sea. Several hours later, 2 dry cargo ships sank with granulated sulfur on board. In the strait, emergency crews began a search and rescue operation, looking for people lost in the sea. Their work, as you might imagine, was complicated by the continuing fierce storm. The storm also prevented any effective effort at collecting the large amount of crude oil that had been spilled into the strait. The growing area of the water's surface was gradually being covered by a toxic black stain. For the Strait of Kerch, the crude oil leak became a serious ecological catastrophe. Nearly 30 miles of shoreline was affected by the disaster. More than 30,000 birds were lost. The black oil stuck to their feathers, and the birds couldn't fly or find any food. They died by the thousands from the oil poisoning and the cold. Hundreds of volunteers came out to the Gulf Coast. The dead birds were collected and put in bags. The birds that were still alive were washed with a soapy solution. But most weren't so lucky. As often happens in oil spill situations, it's the birds, the fish, the beaches, and the coastline that are hit the hardest. The fuel and the granulated sulfur settling on the bottom also affected deep swimming and bottom-feeding sea life. Thousands of dead fish fouled the coast. Ecologists think that all fish species in the Sea of Azov might be lost, as the Strait of Kerch is a main thoroughfare for most fish migrations between the Azov and the Black Seas. The Strait of Kerch disaster has become the greatest mass shipwreck in the history of modern Russia. Officially, 6 persons lost their lives, though even after all this time, 11 more are still somehow considered missing. About 2,000 tons of crude oil and 7,000 tons of sulfur were spilled into the sea. And according to conservative estimates, the ecological consequences of this disaster will be felt for at least 15 or 20